When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Greasy Goblin YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread, or specifically a Game of Thrones. And today's video is everyone's favorite, once again, Bran 4. Bran has a lot of chapters early on in a Game of Thrones, and we're back with him, and this chapter is going to focus on a couple things. Again, foreshadowing the Lannister and Stark conflict, also building up Robb as a character. A lot of this chapter focuses on Robb himself. We get a bit of development into the others, and also Bran and Old Nan's dynamic, and Bran specifically how he views the others, and maybe some more foreshadowing to how the Three-Eyed Crow is maybe playing him false. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach people that might like this content as well. Getting into Bran 4. So Bran 4 starts on page 237. Bran is looking at the window, and he sees Rickon playing with the three direwolves, and this is going to foreshadow something that comes a little bit later on in the chapter, but at the moment he is playing with Shaggy Dog, Grey Wind, and Summer. And this is a great introduction to this chapter because it shows what Bran wants to be doing and how he misses what he was able to do before his fall. And Bran in his head notes that Grey Wind is the biggest, but Summer seems the smartest, with its golden eyes that see everything. So we get a lot here. This first of all shows that Grey Wind is kind of at this moment, the leader of the pack. He is the one growing the fastest. He is the physically strongest, which is the truth of the three direwolves that we see here. Now, when we look at Summer, how Summer is described as being smarter, but more frail, a little smaller like Bran. And we also get this idea that Summer sees everything, similar to the way Bran will see everything later down the lines. And Bran is close to tears as he wishes he could play, but he can't. And he thinks he is 8 now, almost a man grown, but he can't cry. And this is an interesting note. We talk about this a lot within the story, that a lot of these characters have to grow up much quicker than they should. Bran is only 8. Just think about yourself when you were 8. You probably cried a decent bit. But in this world, crying is not good. It's part of that toxic masculinity type thing that we see in this series, where males are not allowed to show any vulnerability. That is seen as a deep weakness and will be used against you. And that's something that the Starks are not exempt from. And we're going to even see this with Robb. We have a nice little mini arc in this series, or we have a nice little mini arc in this chapter, which exemplifies this quality actually in Robb. And Robb and Bran are going to find solace in each other by the end of this chapter, which I think is a really great point and strength of this chapter, and what makes it my favorite Bran chapter so far, is that unlike a lot of other Bran chapters, they didn't really feel like there was a Bran-like character arc within this chapter. And it really is Bran and Robb having their own character arcs within this own chapter. And again, I just wanted to say that this is major for Robb's character as well as Bran's character, establishing that idea early on in the chapter. Bran then says that the dream was a lie. So again, there's this dream that Bran has that he has to fly, and he's going to be able to fly, basically. That's the promise. And Bran notes that when he woke up, he's not able to do those things. He's paralyzed basically from the waist down. He can't walk. He can't fly. And he bitterly thinks about the crow. And very interestingly, the old Nan says, all crows are liars. And is this foreshadowing for later? When Bran meets the Three-Eyed Crow, or Brynden Rivers, or Bloodraven, which, whatever you want to go with, he does lie to Bran to a degree. Bran was promised the ability to be able to really fly or run, and that was what Bran thought he was getting himself into, but that wasn't really the case at all. It was kind of a technicality where they're saying, yes, you'll be able to fly when you're in other things, but not in your own body, which is not what Bran inherently wants. And could this be bigger foreshadowing to what we talked about with me and House the Stag in our collab video on Bran? Are they manipulating Bran? Which, again, I think they definitely are. And are they lying to him? Which is definitely a possibility. But that will get us into page 238. So, moving into page 238, Old Nan then starts to say that she knows a story about a crow, But Bran doesn't want to hear her stories. He hates them. Because this is the idea now, that Bran, when he had been hearing Old Nan's stories before, it was because of his own will. He, went to Old Nan, or Old Nan came to him, and he stayed there and listened to her stories. But now that Bran is someone that's forced to be in close proximity to Old Nan, he's constantly with her, he doesn't want to hear these stories. He doesn't want to be sitting in a room wasting away listening to stories about other people. That's what I think is playing in Bran's mind. And I like that Bran gets a little bit more development within this chapter on that idea. And again, he knows that he used to like them, but that was before he lost the use of his legs. He knows that Old Nan is always with him, cleaning him, and basically kind of like a handmaiden to a degree, but it's more like a grandma type person to Bran. It is more where I would lean towards. And she is constantly there to keep him company. Bran then does a little bit of a description of Old Nan, saying that she's a very old woman. He notes that even Ned knew her as Old Nan growing up. She had come there long ago as a wet nurse and had stayed there. She had no remaining family living with her anymore except the simpleton giant Hodor. And that opens up a lot of questions, because who is Old Nan? Where did she come from? What is her actual name? A lot of interesting questions are brought up in this little paragraph here from Bran. And Bran again states that he doesn't want to hear her stories, and he hates her stories. He thinks about how he doesn't want Old Nan either. He wants his mother and father, and to walk and climb and play with his brothers. Because if you look at Bran, before Bran had fallen, think about his world, right? He was going to live out his fantasies, going to King's Landing to be a knight or a good fighter, and he was going to become a lord one day. And now he wakes up and he can't do any of those things. His mother and his father are gone. Again, remember, he's 8 years old, and his mother and his father are gone. Half of his siblings are also gone. Bran is another character that gets this idea of loneliness, because in reality, Bran is never really alone, right? Like Dany. Like Dany's always kind of being waited on. It's the same idea with Bran. But Bran can't seek out anyone. It's just people that are told to look after him, and that's one of the issues that Bran faces. And again, he's just a young kid, and he feels abandoned. I really do sympathize with what Bran is feeling. And Old Nan finishes the page saying she knows a boy who hates stories, which leads into page 239. And moving into page 239, Bran feels like he's going insane with Old Nan's constant clicking with needlework, and he notes that when he woke up, he felt lied to, that he could not fly. He was tricked by the crow. And that's an interesting point that I want you guys to really hold on to, because it's something that is going to come back into play later on when Bran eventually does get to the cave. This exact feeling is going to come right back up, where I think it's interesting that Bran goes on this entire journey to find the three-eyed crow, when in reality, he feels tricked, lied to by this crow, but the crow consistently gives him, either visions or signs to go north. It's an interesting manipulation that is being done on Bran at this moment. And again, Bran kind of feels like how I talked about in the last page, where he feels abandoned, that everyone is gone. Again, there's fresh new faces everywhere, right? Because Ned took so many people from Winterfell that people that were in charge back then when Bran was, not, unconscious and had use of his legs are no longer here. It's a lot of people taking their places, like we saw with Robb and Catelyn, where Robb had to make all of these appointments, and that's why Luwin kind of went to Catelyn in that chapter. So again, I think this is really great writing, and Bran notes that it feels like all of them are dead. And it's interesting, because this is more foreshadowing that a lot of these people actually are going to die. Catelyn's going to die. He's never going to see his mother again. He's never going to see his father again. A lot of these people that were in positions of power, that were in positions that Bran would know them, like Jory, are going to die. So again, it's more foreshadowing to that idea. And Bran notes that while Rickon and Robb are still here, he notes that Robb is changed now. He carries a sword like we talked about in the last few chapters with Robb, and he never smiles. He is constantly at work trying to improve his sword skills, as well as drilling with some of the others. And Robb has become Robb the Lord. Now, this is very important to establish, because this is going to come full circle by the end of the chapter. Robb is this character that is trying to put on his best Ned persona. He's trying to get people to respect him and show that he is someone worthy of being Lord Stark and in charge of Winterfell. He's having to step up at such a young age, and it weighs heavily on Robb. And Bran is seeing that. He's seeing what other people are going to see of Robb, which is good. That's what Robb wants people to think of him as. But it's hard when you're Bran and you're trying to understand Robb, who doesn't really feel like your brother anymore. It's a hard, like, pill to swallow. And Robb, again, it just doesn't feel like he has time for Bran. Robb has so much going on, and Robb prefers that instead to be with his little brother, to be with his friends. And that's something that Bran notes in this page, that Robb at night would discuss accounts and other matters with Lewin, and sometimes Robb would be gone, going with Hallis Mullen, and on these occasions, Rickon would cry. To Bran, it seemed like Robb had more time for Mullen and Theon than for him. And again, it's a really tough pill to swallow, and I think we can understand why Robb is going that route. Robb is someone that is deeply stressed out. He is someone that is taking on the weight of the worlds onto his shoulder, and we're not even at the point where Robb is commanding the North to go to war yet. He's just trying to run Winterfell and be the Lord of Winterfell. He's just trying to be the Lord of Winterfell and do that role justice, and it weighs on him heavily. And he goes to his friends for comfort, for joy, to get away from it. Bran is kind of a reminder of Robb's duties, if you think about it, because again, Robb also is in the back of his mind thinking the Lannisters are these people that pushed Bran out of a window and that they're inciting a war. Every time he looks at Bran, he's going to see that and remember his duties. So I think that's something else to kind of think about when we look at Robb as a character. And again, Rickon, we know, would cry because he felt like he was being abandoned. And that's something that's interesting because it's actually going to happen. Bran is going to leave and go south to war, and that will be the last time Rickon and Bran will see him. And maybe he comes back as like a mutated wolf thing that gets resurrected, but regular Robb, that will be the last time they see him. And Old Nan then says, what about the story of Brandon the Builder, as it was one of his favorites? Bran knew the story, that Bran built Winterfell, and many think that the wall as well. But that was never his favorite. She must be thinking of his uncle, or another Brandon like the one she nursed that died. And we get a very interesting quote to start out page 240 that I think is very interesting to think about, because it could be a lot of foreshadowing to what Bran will become. So that'll get us into page 240. So into page 240, Catelyn says to Bran that in her mind, in Old Nan's mind, all of the Brandons molded together. Now, it's an interesting theory because some people, I think Preston Jacobs really cultivated this theory, that there's an idea that Bran is kind of all of the Brandons. Like, Bran goes back, builds the wall, and he's actively been trying to go back and stop the others and the White Walkers and all that. And this could be a sign of evidence that you could look at because it's interesting. There is a lot of emphasis put on it. And could that be something that George is trying to put into the end game? It kind of does sound a lot like what George could do. I don't actually hope he is doing that, but it is interesting. But Bran notes that these stories about Brandon the Builder were never his favorite. Bran says his was always the scary ones. And he hears Rickon outside playing, but can see nothing, to his frustration, which he pounds on his thigh and feels nothing. Because again, he's basically paralyzed from the waist down. He's not going to feel any pain on his legs. And again, it's that frustration that Bran is feeling of how his life is going right now. And Old Nan questions Bran. What do you know of fear? You haven't really felt fear. Old Nan notes that fear is for winter, when children live and die, when the sun is gone for years, when it is extremely cold and the White Walkers come. Bran then says, she means the others, to which Nan starts to tell the story of the long night. How there was a winter for a generation where kings died in their castles and women killed their babies to not let them starve. Nan finishes with saying, so is this the type of story you like? And I got to agree with Bran. I'm much more inclined to like that story than the Brandon the Builder story. And again, we see a lot of interesting things going on here of what are the powers of the others, like we had seen in the first chapter. And we kind of learn here that the others have, or supposedly have, some control over the weather. They make it extremely cold wherever they go, even to the point where kings really can't get warm, that they die in their castles. it's interesting the way that this is brought about, because it's clear foreshadowing as to what we're probably going to see in the Winds of Winter. And Bran then begins to talk, saying, well, yes, only, and then he's cut off. As Old Nan continues, she describes them, saying that they came from the darkness as cold and dead things. They hated iron and fire and all things that had warmth in their veins. Now, this is very interesting because, again, fire. That implies, well, dragon fire, in my opinion. And that's why I think Daenerys is such a pivotal character to the story. And the interesting part is going to be, in the show, they had it where there was this Night King figure, which is not in the books at all. Are the others going to be able to be taken out by Dragonfire? Are they going to be, if there is some sort of leader that is above all of them, can Dany just roast him and be done with it? I don't think it's going to be that simple. And I think that's an interesting point where you have the fire part of this. And we look at the Valyrian swords, which are, forged from Dragonfire and stuff like that. It's an interesting idea of how you combine the two ideas of like an idea of iron and fire. And Old Nan continues, saying they rode their dead horses. They attacked the kingdoms with armies of the slain, and no one could stop their advance. Now, this is interesting because I have theorized that there actually is not going to be this one big battle to decide the fate of the world. I have come to think that the others are more than likely going to keep advancing and not be stopped. And that there's going to be some sort of peace pact between the two to where the others get something. Now, that's the hardest part to figure out. We don't know a lot about the others. We don't know exactly what is going on with them. What motivates them is the big key thing we just do not know yet. And George has not really given us a ton to work off of in that regard. And I am someone that believes the living are not going to be able to stop the others. It's going to be a very difficult fight. And especially with the way the kingdoms are right now, where they're not rallied together whatsoever, I don't see a way that they stop them. And that's what's interesting as we get into page 241. So, getting into page 241, the story continues, but Bran cannot help but listen in further. And Old Nan talks about how this was before the Andals, and this was during the time of the first men who had taken their land from the children of the forest. The war with the others was getting so bad, a man and his companions set out looking for the children, who still lurked in the hills and wooded areas and watched through the trees. Over years they could not find them, and the man was eventually alone, his companions all dying alongside of his dog. The others were closing in on him, and the ice spiders were chasing him. And at this very moment, they are interrupted as Hodor and Luwin enter, giving Bran a little bit of a fright because he was on the edge of his seat. He was really enjoying the story, and who wouldn't? It sounds like a very intriguing story. But this tells us a couple things, and it's something that kind of helps us explore the children of the forest. What are their motivations for helping Bloodraven or Bran? Why would they want to help, I guess, the living or the people south of the wall? And that's something I think we have to look at. Are they trying to get some alternative motive where they are regaining power that they lost because of the first men? And I think that's an interesting question to examine. Also, we have ice spiders, which are super sick. I hope we get to see those in Winds of Winter or in A Dream of Spring. But it's a very interesting idea because the story here that Bran has told is not concluded. We don't know what actually ends up happening. But as I said, they are interrupted, and Luwin announces that they have a visitor, and Bran's presence is requested. Bran tries to say he's not going since he is listening to Old Nan's story. Now, this is an interesting turn because right at the beginning of this chapter, Bran doesn't want to hear Old Nan's stories. He wants to be anywhere else but in this cooped up in this room with Old Nan. But now all of a sudden he's flipped. He wants to hear Old Nan's stories instead of going out. And Old Nan says that the stories will be here when he gets back, but oftentimes travelers bring their own stories, which is actually a lot of wisdom. When you have new people, that's how stories develop. That's how stories are cultivated. A lot of these stories wouldn't happen if we didn't have people from other cities coming from to and fro. And then Bran then asks who the visitor is, and Luwin responds, Tyrion Lannister and some Night's Watchmen who he has sent, or who have a message from Jon. Lewin then instructs Hodor to take Bran down to meet them, and Bran notes how Hodor is 7 feet tall. And that gets us into page 242. Now, as 242 goes, Bran notes how Hodor always smells of horse, but how muscular he is. Now, this is something I think they didn't get right in the show. I love the actor who plays Hodor, but I don't think the depiction of Hodor is necessarily accurate. Hodor is described, especially in this first chapter, as being very strong, very muscular. Not like just this really tall guy who just has a lot of weight to him. He's more built, I would say. Now, not, like a Khal Drogo type, but he definitely has kind of that muscle there. And Bran remembers how Theon said that Hodor does not know much, but he does know his name. And this is something that Old Nan laughs about. And again, it shows Theon as this character that doesn't take anything seriously. He's always making a joke, and he's that type of character, especially early on, and we don't really get deeper into his character until kind of the next book, but this is interesting to kind of note before we get further in. But something that is very interesting is that Old Nan says Hodor's actual name is Walder, which would imply that he is somehow related to the Freys, and that's something that we could possibly take away from this little encounter. Now, she doesn't remember when he started saying Hodor, but he eventually only said that. So he was referred to as Hodor. Again, very mysterious and a little interesting, as that could be tied into Bran, as we could see something maybe similar to how the show did it. Now, Bran then descends the tower with the two and enters the hall to see Robb sitting on Ned's seat and Mullen and Theon at his sides. And Bran notices that there's a lot of tension and anger in the room, and no words really need to be said for Bran to really feel this. And again, we know why, from Robb's point of view, he would have this. Again, Robb is under this idea, because Catelyn put it in his head, that the Lannisters are basically against the Starks. They pushed Bran, and Bran is the way he is because of the Lannisters. Now remember, Bran does not know that. So again, that's why Bran maybe takes more of a sympathetic route, where Robb does not, and Robb is very aggressive to Tyrion. And Tyrion, on the flip side of this, Tyrion doesn't have really any bad ill will towards Robb. It's Robb here who is the aggressor, because of the information that he knows, or the secret information that he knows. Now, it seems that Tyrion and Robb have been talking, and Robb will allow the Night's Watchman to stay, but not Tyrion. Robb then is insulted with how Tyrion calls Robb a boy. While Ned and Catelyn are gone, Robb says that he is the Lord, so he should be treated as so. This is an interesting point, because when we look at someone like Tywin, who says if you have to state that you are something, then your power is not what it needs to be, right? And I think that's a great point here, is that Robb has not proven to Tyrion that he is the Lord, a person that should be respected. And again, I want you guys to remember, I specifically wrote this down in my notes, Tyrion's advice to Jon. Tyrion tells Jon, basically, be yourself. Don't let people get under your skin by calling you a bastard, Lord Snow, whatever. And Robb is kind of in the same boat as Jon, where Robb does not like being called a boy. That's something that's very common, and it's very common with a lot of our younger characters. They don't like being called a child. And again, Robb is going to learn from this. Maybe it's not because of Tyrion, but it's something that it's something that Robb will learn. He will use this advantage against someone like Tywin, and playing into that, he is going to realize that his opponents like Tywin are going to think he is a rash boy that's only playing at war. That's something that Robb will use, and it's a very interesting theme as we move forward. Tyrion then fires back, saying that your bastard brother seems to have gotten all of the courtesy, which again, I had noted down that this isn't entirely true. I know this is Tyrion just poking fun at Robb, but Jon was actually also hostile towards Tyrion. On their first meeting, Jon disliked Tyrion. He didn't really have any soft feelings, especially, again, the same interaction happened, where Tyrion called Jon a bastard, and Jon was not, very happy with this. So again, we see the same type of conversation between Ned's quote-unquote sons. And I think that's interesting to look at. Again, the similarities between Jon and Robb. And that gets us into page 243. Sorry, it gets us into page 243. Sorry, I did not update the page for the last page. That is my bad, guys. Tyrion then turns attention to Bran, saying that it is true, he lives, and that the Starks are hard to kill. Again, we get more foreshadowing to this idea that the Starks are hard to kill, when in reality, we're going to see a couple Starks end up dying. And another thing that's interesting here is that Benjen is also presumably dead at this point since he's been missing for so long. So it's interesting that that gets brought up at this point as well. And Robb, again, foreshadows that you better remember that, because, again, we're going to see Robb pose a massive threat to the Lannisters and Tywin specifically in the Westerlands and the Riverlands as a whole. Bran is then prompted to sit on the little throne or Ned's chair, and that Robb has been on, and which is described as being amazing, with the direwolves on the arms jutting out. But Bran himself feels extremely small in it. Again, Bran is only 8 years old. I don't know how he would not feel small. This chair is built for the Lord of Winterfell, or even a king of Winterfell. And that's another thing we're going to note here, is that if George goes down the road where Bran becomes like King of the North or King of Westeros, this is Bran's first time sitting on basically the throne. And that's an interesting little note here, because again, this is a throne. Back in the days when the Starks were kings, this was a throne. So again, that's interesting to note. Tyrion then begins to question Bran, asking that he was quite the climber, and how did he fall? And Bran instantly says he never fell. But again, Luwin breaks in, and this is something that I want to point out. Think about how much sway Luwin has, right? Luwin is this character that is able to speak for the Lord, and Robb allows this to happen. If we look at that and put it into other households and the way they hold their influence, there's a reason the Maester conspiracy is as popular as it is. And this is one of those reasons, because we see how much Luwin has sway in this conversation. And again, Luwin breaks in saying he remembers nothing before his fall again. But Luwin breaks in saying he remembers nothing before his fall. And again, this is looking at the idea that the Three-Eyed Crow really took those memories from Bran for a particular reason. So again, interesting to note there as well. Robb then snarls, saying Bran is not here to be questioned by him. Again, Robb is not holding in his anger or keeping his emotions in check, which is something we will see Robb struggle with throughout the main story. Robb tells him to get on with his business, and Tyrion says he has a gift for Bran and asks if he likes to ride. And Luwin again, we see him cut in again. He doesn't really let Tyrion continue or even Bran respond to this. Luwin cuts in, saying the boy has lost the use of his legs and he cannot ride. And Tyrion refutes this, saying all you need is the right saddle and horse. Tyrion also notes that even a cripple can ride, to which Bran feels like a knife has been put in his heart, saying he is not a cripple. Again, we see the same thing. Tyrion stating that Bran is a cripple is something that Bran does not like, but it is what Bran is. Tyrion is this character that is really being used, especially early on, to tell us what these characters really are, and for our main characters to get over it, right? Stop worrying about if people are calling you a child or they're calling you a cripple. Either A, prove them wrong and be more than what you are, like Robb does, and how he uses that to his advantage, or like Bran, just embrace it. There's nothing you can do to change it, so why be upset when people call you it? And Tyrion kind of responds to this saying, well, then I am not a dwarf. My father will be pleased. Again, Tyrion, very good at jesting, very, very good at verbal sparring, and a nice little jest there, and something that makes Theon laugh as well, and Theon definitely appreciates it. And Luwin again cuts in again, saying, what saddle and horse will they need? To which Tyrion says, a smart horse. Yeah, if you're going to train, I feel like that, pretty easy to figure out. I don't know why Luwin asked what kind of horse. That just seems very odd. Tyrion basically says you need a smart horse, a young horse, hopefully that hasn't been trained too much, because you don't want to have to unteach what a normal horse would go through, because you're going to have to basically get the horse to understand Bran's voice, and only by the reins, not by anything to do with the legs. And I think this is a very interesting moment for Luwin, because Luwin kind of sits here and he's going to get this blueprint, but there's an interesting description used here. Luwin is described as a big gray squirrel And again, this goes on the idea that the maesters are rodents, because this is a common theme of how Lewin is described, and it's always rodent-like or very small, but nothing like good. And I thought that was something that's interesting to note about Lewin as well. And Lewin says that he should have thought of this himself. And Tyrion remarks that it's not unlike his own saddle, which is an interesting point, right? Lewin is this person that has studied at the Citadel for a long time. He's very learned in the world, and he didn't think of a simple saddle for Bran. It does raise questions, and I don't think Lewin is this character that's a mass manipulator that's heavily involved in the Grand Maester conspiracy, but there are things that it's very interesting that Lewin didn't think of that. And we get why Tyrion would understand how the saddle works and all that because of his own struggles with riding. But you would think Lewin would know how this saddle would work already, but I guess he does not. Bran then asks if he will really be able to ride. Again, he is thinking how the crow lied to him, and he's playing on that idea that, is he going to be lied again? Will his hope be brought up once again just to be crushed? Again, really playing on what happened in the last dream and Bran's doubt and his distrust in people. And Tyrion says that he will, and he will be as tall as any of them. And Robb is confused by this, because Robb has been told by his mother that the Lannisters are all bad. They pushed Bran out this window and basically made him a cripple, and they tried to assassinate him. Is this a trap? Why is Tyrion helping Bran? And Tyrion responds that Jon asked it of him, and he has a spot for cripples, bastards, and broken things. And at this moment, Rickon comes in. And this is where this really starts to heat up. Because if you guys remember, Rickon was playing with all three of the wolves. And as the wolves come in, they instantly do not like the smell of Tyrion. And they begin to enclose around him. Again, playing on this idea of the Starks versus the Lannisters and more foreshadowing to that idea. And Theon notes that they don't like the smell of him. Again, kind of jesting and mocking Tyrion. Tyrion then tries to back away and get out of the situation and leave, but is actually kind of attacked on all sides. They nip at him and make him fall to the ground. But what is interesting here is that Robb is not the character that springs into action to get them to stop. It's actually Bran. Bran at this moment yells to Summer to stop and to come to him. And again, is this foreshadowing to King of the North, Bran, as he is commanding while sitting on the throne? Thought that was another interesting point. Also, again, I forgot to change the page number, guys. I'm very sorry about that. Just off my game. You know, sometimes I'm just off my game. But we are on to page 245. Now, Summer then instantly comes to Bran, and Robb sees, again, what Bran just did. He kind of wakes him up, and he gets Grey Wind to come back to him as well. Bran then tells Rickon to do the same, and Shaggy does as well. Shaggy Dog does it very reluctantly and kind of gives, Tyrion a last little snarl on his way back. And Tyrion says that he is fine, but just his dignity has been hit. To which Robb is shocked that they did that, which is interesting because Robb is actually shocked. He didn't think that they would do that. And what's interesting to play on is, were the wolves acting alone, or was that their own kind of will going after Tyrion? Because we know Summer, if it was Bran connected with Summer, Bran had no ill intent on Tyrion from the beginning of this. So it has to be that the wolves themselves smelled the dangers of the Lannisters and things to come. That's the way I would take it. You could also point to they were with Rickon, and Rickon is very wild, so maybe that is why as well. A lot of interesting questions to be asked on why they actually attacked Tyrion. And Tyrion jests, saying that maybe they mistook him for dinner. Tyrion then bows to Bran and thanks him for calling them off, and Tyrion starts to leave. But at this point, Lewin kind of calls to Robb, basically, and they start to whisper. Now, this is, again, more of that, subtle foreshadowing to me of a Maester conspiracy, because this is very suspicious activity, that Lewin has this much hold over Robb. That Lewin whispering in his ear gets Robb to change his mind, and Robb tells Tyrion that the hospitality of Winterfell is his for doing Bran a kindness and such. Tyrion refutes this, basically saying, spare me your false courtesies. I know you don't want me here. I would feel safer if I wasn't here. You would feel safer if I wasn't here. And he basically says he's going to go find a town outside of the walls and may even find a bed warmer. He tells Yoren to meet them on the road and takes his exit. That gets into page 246. And again, something that I think is interesting, and we're going to get to it in this page, is that Robb still has not mastered the way of being a lord. And this is exemplified perfectly in this chapter. Robb is doing his best and trying to act the part, but at times he's still not confident enough in himself. He's still growing and learning how to be that. And that's the thing I love about this, is that Robb is not this character that is instantly good as Lord. He doesn't play the role that well right now. He's learning, and that's what's very important. And it's something we see a lot with Dany as well, as she's learning to be the Khaleesi. George does a fantastic job of building up these characters early on. So Robb then turns to the remaining Night's Watchman officers and offers them hospitality. Now again, building off of what I said, Bran notes that Robb kind of comes off very awkward, that this was a very rehearsed speech that he was giving to them. But all the same, the Night's Watchmen take it, of course. They, staying in a castle, much better than staying in, a random town or even on the road. But again, Bran notes that this is Robb trying to be the Lord. He's learning to be the Lord. He's still not great at it. And after this, Bran, Summer, and Hodor then go back to his room, and he is excited. And he hugs Summer that, he's finally going to be able to ride. That's one of the things that Bran was looking forward to the most. And it's got to be a huge weight lifted off of Bran's shoulders, because Bran has been confined to a room. Now he's going to be able to ride, and that's really awesome for Bran. And then he falls into a sleep. And then, interestingly enough, right after Tyrion's encounter with Bran and the interrogation, and again, more foreshadowing to the idea that Bloodraven, or the Three-Eyed Crow, took some of the memories of Bran, especially the Cersei and the Jaime parts, and took them out. And Bran recounts climbing a tower of sorts and seeing two gargoyles discussing something meant to represent, again, Cersei and Jaime. And the dream ends as he tells them he didn't hear. And that gets us into page 247. And at 247, he wakes to hearing Hodor. He is then washed and put into proper clothing and taken to dinner with Robb and the Black Brothers. And again, we're going to see Robb trying to be the Lord as he hosts this dinner with the Black Brothers. And he's going to lose his cool a little bit. Robb asks about Jon, to which only Yoren says, Sir Alistair's bane. And then Robb asks about Benjen, and the mood shifts, as Yoren tells him how he was sent out to look for Royce, and has been long gone, and is probably dead. Now, very similar to the way Jon reacts to this news, Robb very angrily responds, he is not dead. Again, showing the similarities between Jon and Robb. And this has been something that we've seen throughout the beginning of the story, is how similar Robb and Jon really are. And Robb, once again, is showing his youth. He's standing up with his hand on his sword hilt, angrily saying, he is not dead. Again, the common theme still showing how young Robb is and how much Robb has to learn. And that gets us into page 248. Again, I did not switch the page. I am sorry, my guys, but I'm just not on it today. But that gets us into 248. Yoren then looks at Robb, who he's very unimpressed with. Again, Robb is showing that he's a very young kid. Seems like he's a little pampered a little bit. And he basically says, well, whatever you say. And one of the younger men says that there is no one who knew the forest better than him, that he will come out at some point. And Yoren says, maybe he will, or maybe he won't. Good men have gone missing in there. And Bran instantly thinks about old Nan's story. And this is what I think is interesting, is that Bran recounts that story while we're learning of Benjen's disappearance. I think that is a really interesting way to put that, where George is kind of showing us what possibly happened to Benjen without actually telling us that the others were probably the reason he hasn't come back yet. Bran then, kind of without thinking, blurts out that the children of the forest will help him. To which Theon laughs, and Luwin says, the children of the forest have been dead for thousands of years. Now, this is what I think is interesting, because when I talked about my Maester conspiracy reaction to Preston Jacobs, One of the things that I said in that video is I think it's very reasonable for the Maesters to believe that magic has pretty much all but died out. The Children of the Forest haven't been seen in thousands of years. I think just logically, and if you're going to be a highly studied person, you understand the existence of the Children of the North, or the Children of the Forest, which Lewin does, but he just notes that they're probably dead, which I think is a logical outcome, and I don't think that that's a bad outcome or bad conclusion to make. So Yoren replies, maybe down here, but up north, who knows what is really dead? And that's a great point, right? Is that we really don't know. Our rangers at the wall can only do so much, and with the numbers shrinking up at the watch, it's harder and harder to actually send out scout parties. So again, I think Yoren has a great counter argument. You can't fully say something is dead without really exploring where they would be. So again, great counterpoints to both. But the chapter kind of ends after this with Bran going to bed and Robb is with him. And we get a great scene between the two. This is one of my favorite scenes of pretty much the entire first quarter of the book, where Robb is more himself. We haven't seen this side of him in a while. And he tells Bran, we will find him a horse. Bran also says, will they come back? Robb says yes. And that they can even surprise Catelyn on the road and go see Jon for a surprise. And that gets us into page 249. And another thing I want to note here is, again, it shows how Robb is still a young man. You know, he wants to go out to see the wall, to see Jon, to surprise him. He wants to, you know, have his mother back and all of these things. And I can't blame him. You know, he's still a very young man. And in page 249, the last page of the chapter, we see, I think, one of the most powerful messages, and it concludes the arc of this chapter. We see how vulnerable and overwhelmed Robb is feeling. As he says, it will be our own little adventure. And Bran realizes that Robb is actually crying. Because think about what Robb has been going through in this chapter and just past chapters where he's taken on all of the responsibilities of Lord of Winterfell way too soon. You know, he probably wasn't ready for it. His mother's gone. His father's gone. All these people that advise him are really gone. He has to put a lot of trust in Lewin, and it's really getting the best of him. And you can see that here where Robb needs support. And so does Bran. Bran is facing a tough situation, and the two kind of grip hands and embrace a little bit as well in this chapter at the end of it. It's a great moment because from what we've seen from Bran at the beginning of this chapter is Bran feels like Robb doesn't have time for him, feels very isolated from him, that Robb is the Lord. And Bran in this moment, I think, realizes that Robb doesn't want to be these things. Robb has to do these things for the honor of House Stark, to fill his responsibilities. And Robb still at heart is still just a kid. I mean, Tyrion hits the nail on the head. Robb isn't ready for this. And when we get later in this book and we see Robb evolve as a character, this is a moment that you think back on where Robb has grown so much. And he doesn't completely, you know, turn into a man. He still has his moments of weakness. But this is a great point for Robb and Bran's relationship. It's something that, in my opinion, the show missed quite a lot. I thought the Robb and Bran's relationship was still decent, but it seems like this that the show missed in season 1 that really make how Robb views Bran and Rickon's supposed death later on and his anger towards Theon for betraying them. It puts it more into context. Like, yes, Robb is going to be mad at Theon regardless because he betrayed him, but you can tell from this moment that Robb and Bran share at the end of this chapter that the two are closer than maybe they appear. And being, two of the last Starks in Winterfell, Rickon being there as well, but he's still, he's very young. He's, I think, 3 at this point. It's the two really being able to kind of let out their feelings and not have to worry about how people are perceiving them. But thank you guys all for watching this video. I think for me, this is Bran's strongest chapter so far. It just does the most for building a character like Robb. It does the most for building Bran as a character. We get a little bit of Tyrion, which is always nice, and just a lot of great foreshadowing. So thank you guys all for watching the video, and I see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.